Good morning and welcome to Horizons, March 2026. So for everyone that doesn't know us, my name's David. I'm one of the founder directors of Altair, and this is
Lindsay, and I'm the other founder directors of Altair.
Today, Horizons. Just for anybody that hasn't been here before, the whole point of Horizons is to look at what's happening in the next 12 months to 18 months that's kind of on the horizons. That's why we call it Horizons. That's going to affect media, marketing and advertising. Really, this is all about you. So this is what I say every time we do Horizons. It's all about brand you. The whole reason we want to do this is we want to really take a step out of the day-to-day and allow people to think about what's on the horizon so they can do better, to be the smartest person in the room and be the smartest person in the office. So the more questions you ask, the more you interact with the polls, the more that you join our WhatsApp channel, the smarter you'll become. So get involved. As we go through this, we do have polls. I think that's open throughout.
There's
so
4 polls.
Yeah, 4 polls. So feel free to answer those as we go. As I said, feel free to use the Q&A. And I've got full control over the slides for the first time. It's going to be fun. To kick off, we just want to do a recap of what we talked about in December. That QR code there is for our WhatsApp channel. That's going to be really useful for you today because I'm going to talk about it a lot. We talked about synthetic audiences last time. If you're not talking to us about synthetic audiences, you need to take a long, hard look at yourself because they are brilliant. And in fact, what we'll do about 20 minutes after this webinar, we'll bump that on the WhatsApp channel so you can see our opinions, what it's about and what are synthetic audiences in the first place. We also talked about Meta and just the madness of Meta and the Andromeda algorithm kickoff, where it's all about creative and all of those type of things. And we've got that as well. We'll bump our opinions on that on the WhatsApp channel there. And we also talked about 3D out of home, which is wicked. Absolutely amazing. Like anamorphic, I think is the word, isn't it? For Globe actually doing a lot of the creative for you. So a lot of the time, all of this creative stuff is actually done by the media owners. So there's the barriers to entry to get into all of these things is really, really cool.
And actually the adoption of it. So we talked about this 3 months ago, and it's such a good way to stand out. But I'm not seeing it anywhere. It's not really happening because it's something that people are not really sure how to get started with. There's still a massive opportunity to get a first cut through.
There is, and a massive standout. And I mean, we talked about Global, didn't we? So, and Global will do the vast majority of the work for you.
And they've changed pricing, so it's a lot more accessible.
To make it really,
the other
really
main owners are doing it as well. So.
Did you want to talk about last year?
Yeah, we also had a look back at
just say how
February 2025.
Good we are at this stuff.
Looking at February 2025, what we were talking about then last year was obviously, and we've talked about this a lot, an insane year for development, particularly in search behaviour. So last year, there was the Gartner research that talked about the fact that they were predicting that by 2026, AI search will have taken over or reduced traditional search by 25%. That's quite an aggressive claim. We talked about that, and it was still very early. I think we were talking about assistants and things coming in, and it all was quite a strange thing. And now it's not at all. And today we're going to be talking a lot about the actual adoption of that technology. So we've now got a year of data since then. But to that fact of 25% of traditional search reducing, and whether that's happening, that's not obviously what's happened. The shift has been quite interesting in that traditional search is still as strong as it was in terms of people using the search engines, just how they're using them and how they're using the AI searches. But actually probably the biggest thing and the thing that most of our clients will be seeing is that traffic from search engines is the thing that's been more affected. So it's not about actually people using search engines, it's that they're not leaving the search engines.
Searches.
So, which we talked about a bit later on in the sessions last year, but that's now looking like it's about 15% down in terms of traffic going. So that's quite a significant shift. And that's something that, again, we should be helping, obviously, as marketeers, when you're reporting back internally, that's a big stats shift year on year that you're going to have to be answering to businesses about why that's changed and what you're doing about it and how you're going to make things better. But obviously it's just a shift, and we are seeing the quality of traffic is better because those people who do then come through to a site are maybe more intent led. So that's just worth looking at. That year, last year has been phenomenal. It has changed a lot. We're still going through lots of change, but it's not necessarily just people have disappeared.
And I think the big summary of that is we're phenomenal at predicting the future, and that's why you should turn up to Horizons. But for today, what we're actually going to talk about is audience trends. So one of the things that we actually pride ourselves on is being obsessed with audiences. And I think it's probably one of those things that doesn't come across quite a lot because we're kind of immersed into the technology, the data and the media channels. But being obsessed by the audience is the way forward, really, if we're going to actually make proper behaviour change. And that's the whole point of advertising. So the three things we're going to go through today are some of the research pieces that we do. So we probably commission 3 or 4 different pieces of research every single year. So what we're talking about today is future audience trends. So it's probably about 2 and a bit years ago that we commissioned some research to understand how 18 to 21-year-olds are actually using media, how they're consuming their media, how do they get their news, all of those, what device they use and all those type of things. What we actually did a couple of weeks ago is we reran that survey so we could compare actually how's that changing, and we're also analysing what they were doing when they were 16 through. And I think the reason that's so important for today in Horizons is these audiences in 5 years' time are going to be business decision makers. They're going to have disposable income. So they're going to kind of cover the gambit of all of our clients. So it's important to understand what they're doing today, because as we talked about when we did this a few years ago, and we talk about internally quite a lot, is that as soon as you hit 30, you don't suddenly buy the Telegraph. You're still going to be using the channels that you've kind of grown up with. So we're going to talk about that. The next thing we're going to talk about is actually a bit more of a focus. So I think the future audiences and the AI stuff actually is relevant for all clients. But the second one is more around culture, domestic tourism, heritage, and all of those type of things. Because one of the things that we actually talked about when we actually built all the synthetic audiences is that we've actually been doing quite a lot of research over the last 5 years around these culture and tourism audiences and domestic tourism audiences. So we thought it'd be quite an interesting one to kind of put together some work to kind of analyse what have been the changes over the last 5 years and what do we need to do to adapt for those changes in the coming 12 to 18 months. And then finally, artificial intelligence and how people are using it.
Just not talked about it.
I know, we don't talk about AI enough. But yeah, so AI, how it's affecting search, how people are actually using it. Because again, as a media agency, one thing that we bang on about all of the time is don't get caught in an echo chamber, don't get caught in your normal bubbles. So just because we're sitting in London and we're doing our thing and we've got high exposure to all of the AIs, the ChatGPTs, the Perplexities and all of those type of things, what's everyone else doing around the UK? Are we in a bubble? Is there like different uptakes? So we've got those answers and more coming in the third part. So let's kick off with the 18 to 21-year-olds. Now, as we go through all of these surveys, we're going to lean into our strengths. I'm going to talk about data, I'm going to talk about facts and what the survey tells us, and Lindsay's going to talk about her opinions. So 18 to 21-year-olds. So again, just a recap, we ran this survey a couple of years ago, so we rerun it a couple of weeks ago, and then we compared and contrasted. And it was actually quite interesting. I think some of the things that jumped out that were quite interesting before we dive into the actual data is that what does the term regularly use? So like a lot of the questions, what media channels do you regularly use? What social channels do you regularly use? And one thing jumped out that actually there's no such thing as regularly now. I think there's research from Ofcom that said the average person in the UK uses 41 apps every single month. So that fragmentation is huge, right? So I think that's something that's quite interesting to consider as we go through this.
41 apps. Is that a lot? Like thinking about how people use websites, like before it was an app. Would you have been impressed about 41 websites?
Not really, but 41 apps on your phone.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just quite interesting, isn't it? Just you used to always go to the same websites. So
add that as a poll.
Yeah, yeah. So I just
no, absolutely. But it just seems
the
like
way people are accessing things.
It'd be interesting if you actually like tracked it yourself to see how do you fall within that 41, because it would probably surprise you either. I mean, I probably don't use many at all, to be fair. Quite simple. Quite simple.
You are simple.
So let's kick into the data and then you can give your opinions.
Sorry.
So as I said, one of the things that we saw actually when we looked at all of the media channels and all of the social channels, one thing that actually really came across the whole survey was actually a kind of a general reduction in how people use it, which is what we talk about, that kind of fragmentation, that are they using it the same? So what we actually did is we put some statistical analysis into this. That actually you had to be over a certain percentage point change to say, is that in decline or is it stable or is it increasing? The big ones, the first one I thought was genuinely quite interesting because we talked about Be Real. Are you still on that?
No.
So Be Real, we talked about that was kind of the new one that was bubbling up a couple of years ago. We had that on. That's just fallen off a cliff. No one uses Be Real anymore. So that's one of obviously the main losers. But it was obviously one of the new ones. So it's kind of, will it survive or not?
Be Real's quite interesting though, because that was like, at the moment, wasn't it? You had to take a picture and just quite a basic picture.
No filter.
But that kind of content is what younger audiences are doing a lot more with the kind of like the photo dump type things. So they're almost like have moved it in that style of like, actually, here's just a snap of my day rather than a curated, polished.
Yeah. Which actually goes onto the Instagram and Facebook. They're the ones that seem to have been hit hardest.
Yielding.
For that. Between the 18 and 21-year-olds is that was solid double-figure drops in terms of their usage and how they're using them. And actually, like, we've got a write-up that we'll be doing across all of these things that we'll be pushing live tomorrow on the WhatsApp channel. There's a QR code at the end for those who missed it. So anybody that wants kind of more of a deeper dive into this, there's two ways you can get it. You can either look at the WhatsApp channel tomorrow and get the write-up, or you can speak to us directly because we've got huge amounts of data and this is just a summary of the data over the top of it. But I think some of the interesting stuff was, that kind of drop for Meta across Facebook and Instagram, and also what people are using it for. Like, they only use it, it's what we talked about. It's like the awkward family party. They're only really using it for talking to their parents Facebook and things like that. They're not even using Facebook Messenger so much either. So they seem to be the kind of the biggest losers really of for the 18 to 21s, which is quite interesting, especially from a Instagram point of view. But there are some real winners in this, which actually is quite interesting. So this is something that we've talked about for years and years, is actually how do you get into communities? And the big winners that we saw were the likes of Twitch, Discord was one of the big ones, but generally an increase in how people are actually using these kind of private servers, and especially the kind of the integration with gaming as well. So gaming on mobile, gaming through consoles, they had a massive lift in terms of what people were reporting themselves doing. So kind of leaning into those kind of communities and fandoms, and also gaming would be quite an interesting one. I think it's something that everyone should be considering, because essentially you can buy out-of-home ads in games. You can actually run things in partnerships with games. So you don't actually need to be a gaming advertiser to advertise in games. You could be anybody, right? And I think these are some of the kind of the communities and options that would be quite interesting to look at. And I'd also say things like Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow is a community. And I think Stack Overflow is one of those ones that actually, where people go, they talk, and that's where all the LLMs copy stuff off of. So I think it's quite interesting how it's all kind of like.
I think it's also interesting from again, think about mindset, which we talk about quite a lot, of like what kind of, how open people might be to things in different channels, because those gaming environments, obviously they're high dwell time. People are spending a lot of time, but you could say the same about TikTok, but the mindset is a lot more passive on TikTok, whereas in gaming, they're a lot more active, and obviously they don't want to be interrupted by lots of ads kind of throwing at them, but it is like more like the real world type situation, and they're talking on their headsets to their friends and kind of engaging a lot more, but they're there for a long time, so you'd actually build up the dwell time, you'd build up the frequency, like from a pure kind of basic media planning perspective.
And I think that's what showed through in the research too, was the fact that the environments were less scrolly. They're more kind of engaged, conversational, immersed, rather than just, scrolling through. And I think they were the big winners, actually, from the research, which is quite interesting. The other big winners, again, that we've talked about, we normally class it as dark sharing, is the move towards this kind of private and semi-private spaces. So this is where you kind of get things like your WhatsApp channels or your WhatsApp groups, and all again but it keeps you within those kind of niche communities.
And Snapchat probably falls into that as well, really, and that's still.
Well, Snapchat did all right, actually. That's actually stayed relatively steady.
And I think that's the thing about looking ahead and from an audience perspective, and the reason we're talking about it, because obviously not a lot of the people that are here with us are targeting this kind of audience today. But that's exactly the point, is that people take those channels with them. So a lot of the people, talk about the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas now being 16, all that kind of stuff, they're going to be young professionals. And most of the Gen Zs are now young professionals, and they're using Snapchat still to kind of as their channel. Yeah. But very rarely do we do anything on Snapchat, because it's that. But it's like, should you? Well, again, going back to the mindset, if that's where they're just chatting to their friends, is that the right time to be getting in front of them anyway?
Well, and as an agency, one of the words that we use bang on about all the time is authenticity, right? And especially when it comes to social content. And I think what we've seen across all of this research is the kind of leaning towards a Discord, these kind of private and semi-private. It's a lot less performative that you would do that you'd see on Instagram or something like that with all of the filters and talking about the B-reel. Now that B-reel is everywhere, whereas that kind of more authenticity is kind of coming through and there's like less pressure. Everyone feels more comfortable. So as a brand, you need to make sure you're fitting into that rather than just throwing an ad at it.
And I guess even just on it, like we talked about influencers quite a lot, and are these audiences and these age groups, are they wanting to do that same kind of curatedness? So that's where the more natural side of it. But when you talk about private, I think there's been lots of conversation about people not wanting to have their public information out there because they're worried about the impact of it. But actually, if you're looking at teenagers, they're still teenagers and they're completely immortal. So they don't care. They will put everything out there. So it's like the 20-year-olds who might be starting to think that they actually need to have a decent chance in life. They probably care a bit more. But the kind of younger audiences that, again, you're looking at future things that they don't care about being.
Well, that's
great
because I remember, like, this is a bit of a tangent, but like probably about 10 years ago when we were doing some of this research, and it was all very much people had their different personas.
Yeah.
So you had your work persona, you had this digital persona, you had so basically you're dealing with multiple personas, whereas the generations coming through just don't care. Just do whatever. It's all fine. Very fatalistic. So I think there was quite some interesting things that really kind of doubling down in terms of this research is that kind of shift towards communities, the fandoms, the less performative side of things, and becoming more authentic. So I think that's something interesting that,
mindset is the biggest thing.
Mindset and
what is the mindset that they're in that environment? Should you be there?
Yeah. So that kind of covers off that piece of research. Now we move into the whole world of culture. So as we said, this is going to be written up as well. It will be on the WhatsApp channel tomorrow. But again, this is quite interesting because we've done so much research over the last 5 years. I think there was 6 or 7 pieces of research that went into this. So it's quite a lot. And it's been really interesting to see the change. And what we actually did is I think we broke this down into, there was something like 6 clear audiences, of which we're going to talk about 3 today. But again, if you want to know more, get in touch, we can kind of go into more kind of depth on them. But what we're going to do is we're going to touch on the core motivations of the 3 kind of main groups that we saw, but also the trend, what's changing between now and 5 years ago. So the first one is this kind of the experience-orientated 30 to 44-year-old. So we can see like what their interests are and things like that. And I think the family thing kind of intertwined across 2 or 3 of these audiences as well, which is quite interesting. Across all of the audiences, though, that bottom point about value for money is a key thing. And this isn't an affordability thing. It's what's in it for me type thing. Is it really, what value am I going to get from this? And I think we wrote a piece on this on our site probably about 3-4 weeks ago about how do we actually create these experiences to kind of give that value for money, because again, it's not about affordability. Is it any good? So there was quite a lot of things that kind of came out that was quite interesting. If we look at, say, what we see the changes are, is that actually, again, this is across all of the audiences, similar to the affordability piece, is that if we look back pre-2023, there was that kind of strong museum and heritage orientation. You're going to a destination because you actually want to be in that destination. You feel part of that. But now, actually, it's not. It's a package. Like, what are you actually doing? Well, how are you packaging up your whole experience? So, I mean, even the last ones we did, that kind of eating and drinking. And how do you fit the theatre or a cultural kind of event within your whole evening, rather than you're actually going to go and do the cultural event? It's actually, the importance has dropped off quite significantly.
It also means people are wanting to do more time, because time is the big thing with that, isn't it? So they're actually willing to give more time than maybe before, as long as they're getting the full value from it, which is great.
Yeah.
It gives much more opportunity to make more of an engagement with people.
Yeah. So that kind of bottom bit around, it used to be more kind of you go to do culture, to have some culture, whereas now it's, how does culture fit into the experience of what you want to do, and how that's going to work really is kind of the key bit. And I think that's kind of going to be crucial, especially for any venues, right? Yeah,
and we're talking a lot about the kind of, especially the food and bev side of things. That's a big way, especially if like the experience itself might be free. Then that's how do you make sure that you're actually getting some income from those people who are coming, and packaging it up in that way, or like I said, extending their time with you. People are open to that. So that's a really interesting opportunity, thinking about it more of a destination than just an exhibition or an experience in its own right.
And I think, again, another interesting thing around this research is that obviously we've packaged it up into these kind of the experience orientated 30 to 44-year-old. But actually this does cover whether you're a commuter into Manchester, London, Liverpool, Leeds. But it also covers domestic tourism, and it also covers international tourism to a degree as well. And I think there's been some interesting stuff that we've seen over the last year or so about how that differs. In fact, I was having a conversation yesterday about this in terms of if you're coming from Germany or France, the way that you set up your itinerary is different if you're coming over from Asia or the US. So
Very
know
much.
more about that. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, what we're seeing more is the time delay for people. So we see a lot more, the kind of opposite of probably what you'd expect, in that the long haul audiences actually book later and closer to the actual activity, whereas the short haul ones, so the France, Germany, they're the longer booking audiences. So they're much more kind of planned. So they might be coming more for the cultural experience and then might do other stuff around it, whereas long haul audiences are coming for London and then booking the activity afterwards. So then that does change, like, where do you position yourself? How do you make sure you're on that consideration? Even the metrics that you put alongside it. So we've been talking a lot about that with different clients about actually, if you're looking at that longer haul, the important bit is that you're in their consideration. So although like bookings might happen last minute in the week on the day, the thinking doesn't.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that you're okay with doing that? Because obviously we all love being able to report on sales straight away. That's not necessarily actually going to drive the biggest amount of sales for you.
The other thing I just wanted to touch on this 30 to 44-year-old is, well, two things really. The first, which we've kind of got on the slide, is that they're essentially the economic engine for culture, right? And I think that this is probably a slightly younger generation than what you see the kind of the typical. But I think that kind of marries nicely the economic bit into what we've been talking about again for only about 2 years, is how do you start priming these audiences so actually when they do have more time, when they become those empty nesters at say 50, 55, etc., it's that chunk of time that there's high disposable income and a high amount of time to enjoy. How do you prime them now to make sure that actually you're part of that kind of economic engine and getting the revenue through, right?
That 50 to 55 audience was the one that was the only one who have now got more money, more time than anyone else, and spending it on cultural experiences. So but they will have been thinking about it for a long time.
Exactly. And I do think that that's still an audience that isn't maximised and it's missed quite a lot.
Yeah.
That needs to be sorted out. It's call to action.
And not assumed on what that actually is, because 50 to 55 is not actually very old.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's not particularly old. You've got loads of money. You've got more time. You're not going to go there doddering over as like a couple. Yeah. You're probably going to go there with your mates and stuff like that. Exactly. It's like you don't need a stunner yet.
That's what everyone, like, the shift is quite big.
Yeah.
Perception.
The next one is this kind of young explorer, urban adventurer that we saw coming through, which was quite cool. And again, it's leaning into the horizons piece, that actually, even though we class these as young explorers, they did have a reasonable kind of wide age range. It was more of a mentality. It's like similar to what you were talking about in the first bit, right? So when we're talking about young explorers here, it's actually in the urban adventurer. Let's not think it's 21 to 25. It's more of a mindset that we need to be targeting into. And again, there's going to be communities and places they're going to be. But I think it was really interesting, this one, in terms of the novelty things like standing out a bit one, and they expect to be entertained. And again, the two themes, affordability in terms of value rather than affordability. So the value they're going to get for it is one of their other key bits. And I think this is going to be quite an interesting audience to lean into too. And again, this one was more of a blatant shift in terms of the way the trend of over the last 5 years, that actually it was all about bars and clubs and going out for that experience and things like that. Yeah. And now actually you're most likely to pay for the streaming, and we've done loads of research on streaming too. So we've got white papers on that if anybody was interested in that. Most influenced by YouTube and Instagram. So again, it kind of goes into this influencer stuff. And again, there's some content on our site around how there's quite a lot about how to use influencers and things like that. And I think influencers are kind of a not used enough media channel in my experience or my opinion, because I also think that they should be used on a much more ongoing basis rather than we're going to pay you for 4 posts and then never do anything with you again. It's like, again, you're getting into those micro communities. They're talking to their own audiences. Having some sort of longevity will be key to that. And especially if you want to change behaviour, you're not going to do it in one ad or one hit or one post, right?
I think every time we've used influencer content, it's outperformed normal content, which is frustrating if you're a content team in-house and you've got years of experience, and then it's beaten by someone who's just kind of done something on their phone. But it's because it's got that word of mouth So
and authentic. They know their audience and things like that. I think the other thing that was really interesting in this, that again, it's like, how do we expect this to evolve over the next 5 years or so, is this less institutionally loyal. I think there's no loyalty out there at all, really. So it's like, how do you create those experiences to get them to keep coming back? So you have to try a lot harder to make that work, right? So I think it's that kind of going from young and cultured and like you're going out in town and how things fit in with your kind of your night or your day out, to actually this kind of digitally influenced kind of experience seeker has been
It's quite the opposite of the other one, really, which was then the food and drink being part of it. They don't want to eat or drink.
Yeah, they want to experience, don't they? So that's quite interesting. Less motivated by prestige, more by relevance. Nice. So the last one's culture seeker. This one, from where I was looking at it, it kind of leans into more the well-being, the mental. Like you go for peace, right? So a lot of the research we've done, especially over the last 2 years, one of the big things for any kind of culture heritage type thing was that people go there to relax their brains. Basically, they're going for that peace. And this one kind of massively came out. And again, value, what are you getting for your money rather than affordability is one of the key things to put across.
Money and time.
Yeah, money, time. So, and this kind of really leans into how you create your content. So the influencers would work really, really well here. But actually, it kind of sits outside of just doing normal ads. It's like, how are you putting that across? Rather than putting across a specific exhibition or a specific production, a specific show, it's like, how can you put across the kind of more intangible side of things that actually just being in a space and kind of decompressing? I think there's a lot more kind of, the more future thinking advertiser would probably be more leaning into that type of thing rather than relying on the hook of the show. If we go into, what changes over time for these guys, again, similarly to what we talked about, where actually it was all about going to specific museums, specific sites, specific events. Actually now it's much lower commitment. Again, lower loyalty is what we're seeing across all of these things. They're actually really aware of what's on and what's going on. It's just what's in it for them again, I think is one of the key things. So it's all very kind of conditional about what they want to do.
Which is interesting if you're thinking about trying to create a relationship with people and having like frequency, like loyalty, them coming back again and again. That's not necessarily kind of what's coming through with that. But kind of going back to the first one, then it's the whole offering and the whole experience that would be the bit that brings people back to you as a destination. Yeah,
and I think one of the things that we've been talking about, again, internally over the last few weeks, and there's some content on the site that talks about this specifically, is that actually, for a lot of these guys, it's not necessarily about competing with the likes of Netflix.
No.
Because Netflix will have its place within their lives. It's actually, how do you actually do the other side of it? How do you do the contrast of it? Because rather than this kind of social media, everything's really quick, low attention span, everything's kind of the speed of the scroll. Actually, what we've seen across all of these audiences from the research and also some of the other audiences that we haven't included here is that how do you pluck them out of that and go into their kind of their experience? They want to be immersed in that experience. They don't want it to be fast and rapid experience. Or the culture seeker, where it's all around like, how do you get them into there for that piece? Like they want to decompress and they want to be in a space. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done around that. And it's also a brave move, right? Is that if you're a brand within this space, the easiest thing to do is push a specific production, get ticket sales, get the revenue off that specific production, believe everything that Meta says because they mark their own homework in terms of the amount of revenue you get for that production, rather than actually stepping out and saying, right, how do we do something else actually, like, so people equate us with this space or this, whichever audience you want to go through. I think it takes some brave decisions, but I think there's some interesting stuff that can be done there. So that's the culture over the last 5 years. And as I said, with all of this research that we're going through, there's huge amounts more of data behind it, some of which will be written up, as we said, be pushed out tomorrow. But again, there's loads of different ways we can cut this. So if there's anything that strikes a chord of anybody, give us a shout. But let's move on to the wonderful world of AI. So, as I said, it's all right, isn't it? Yeah, that's the power of AI. I did that.
No, you didn't.
I did what the AI did. I typed some words in. That's all you need to do.
Take the credit.
I'm a prompt engineer. So AI and search and like how it's impacted. So again, as I said right at the beginning, one of the key things that we always want to be doing is making sure we're not shouting to ourselves in our own echo chamber. So really, if you're someone in Liverpool, someone in Manchester, someone in Cornwall, somewhere in Edinburgh, are you using it? How are you using it? And what's the interesting stuff? Now, this is the one that's going to be quite interesting if we did this every single year, like just the same questions and see how it changes.
I think a year's too long.
Yeah. Well, it costs a lot of money to do this. So I'm not doing it every month.
I know, I just think it
Anyway,
changes so much.
so there's some really interesting. So this is where it gets really interesting because we're going to do so many charts. This is all about data. So I'm going to show some things. I'm going to say what the data shows, and you're going to give your opinions on it. So let's dive in. Okay, right. So the first thing we wanted to do is the AI adoption. So have you used any AI-powered tools or services? So this one was quite interesting. So there's quite a lot of frequency there. A lot of people have used it. A decent chunk of no, which is quite interesting, but not particularly surprising. In fact, it's surprising that actually the no is quite low. You would have thought there might, if you were thinking in your echo chamber, like you would think that actually maybe that would be a bit bigger. But really, the interesting stuff is when we dive into this by region, by age, by education and things. Because if you look at it on the face of it, across the whole, so this is across the whole of the UK, and this was done about 2 weeks ago as well, so fresh. Actually, a decent chunk of people actually either use it frequently or use it occasionally.
I actually think the not sure is quite interesting.
The not sure thing blew my mind. When you dive into this, it's like, yeah, because it's like...
That's a terminology thing. It's like the question itself was jargon.
Yeah. Well, it could have been. Or you're not even sure because you assume that actually, even if you're using normal Google search, is that AI?
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like, what do people...
Yeah, exactly.
Real people, not people in our world.
People. Cool. So this is quite interesting. So let's see if I can get this kind of thing going. Yeah, it is. Look at that. All right. So London at the top, as you'd expect, it's actually quite a high uptake of actually you use it frequently. But we would expect that, right? So you've got high concentration of tech, media, creative industries within London. You've got more people actually being exposed to AI just through their work, whether it's actually using ChatGPT or Copilot through Outlook or anything like that. So you've kind of got that exposure. So it's as what you'd expect, really. But actually, there's some real kind of outliers here that are actually quite interesting. So, for example, a couple of them is like Northern Ireland and the Northeast. I thought they were genuinely interesting because actually they're on par with London. So actually it isn't just, we're London, we're early adopters.
I'm surprised the Northwest is lower than the Northeast. I'm surprised that's not.
Yeah, well, when we actually dive into it, so when we get to the next questions, we actually cut out anybody that doesn't use AI. So we're asking people how they use AI. So anybody else is irrelevant if you're not using it. And the Northwest actually starts to jump out in a few different ways, which we'll touch on. So people in the Northwest that are using it are actually using it in quite interesting ways. But the Northeast I thought was quite interesting. But actually, what we find there is there's actually a lot of educational institutions up there and things like that. So that was one thing that jumped out in terms of why do we think Northeast is so good. It's not really an age thing as well, because what we found, which we'll touch on probably in the next slide, is actually the age breakdown of how old you are if you use it is quite interesting. That kind of 25 to 34-year-olds is like the strongest group. But actually, the people that responded to this in the Northeast, there wasn't as higher percentage of those. So actually, the Northeast people are, everyone's using it. You're not just relying on an age range, but it is actually quite aligned with education, which is quite interesting. The other things that jump out of this is actually on the kind of the opposite, Wales. The Welsh don't like the AI. Wales don't like the AI. Southwest, they don't like. But one of the things that also that's tied to this is...
busy enjoying the beauty of...
They are. And they're all old. So it's old and rural. And that's, I'm not being ageist, it's what the data shows, because let's go into the data for age and education. So as we can see, actually, once we kind of split this out, say, for example, by education, the more educated you are, the more like you're going to be using it. But actually, the couple of things that I thought was quite interesting in this is this kind of younger age range. Actually, do you think that's just because they're not allowed to use AI because they'll fail all of their exams?
They use it in schools. They use it loads in schools.
Yeah, the adoption there is quite low.
And I think it's quite encouraged now in schools. It's just
it depends. Yeah, it's like kind of grey area, I suppose, isn't it? And like they know
it's no different to using an encyclopedia.
Yeah, we talk about that quite a lot. It's like back in the day, was it the encyclopedia? Yeah, and like
95.
Britannia and all of that type of stuff. Yeah. And then you got it on the CD-ROM, right? And it's like, are you cheating because you don't have to flick through the pages? And then it's like, well, now I can Google it. Well, is that cheating? Well, now I just ask ChatGPT. Well, that is cheating. It's the evolution of our times, isn't it, really? We've lived through it all. But it's quite interesting to see this kind of take up here. And as I said right at the beginning, right, is that all of these should grow, and it'd be interesting to kind of test this like again next year or anything like that. I think the big thing that came out of all of this research was that actually it's definitely kind of getting more integrated into people's behaviours rather than a novelty in terms of how they're using it. And we'll get on how they use it shortly. But there's definitely a kind of a trend that highly educated.
I think it would just become to the point,
forwards.
though. We've talked about this before about like electricity. It's like the blockchain
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So you won't even.
What happens to blockchain?
I think it still exists, just really slow.
Yeah, it's immutable though, isn't it? So.
But it just won't even be a question.
Yeah.
Because
do you use
it
electricity?
is all that you can use. Like there won't be a non-AI powered tool, because why would you have a less advanced intelligence to do it? Why would you?
Deep. Let's move on. Right. So we talked about age and education just there, but actually one of the other things we talk about is actually, are you city-based? Are you suburban? Are you rural? And that kind of lovely little graph in the bottom right is actually the penetration of high-speed broadband. So there's definitely a correlation between rural and like whether you're using all this stuff, as you would expect, really. But next up, what we've done is that if you said you weren't sure if you used AI, or if you said that you did not use AI, we have ditched you. You're gone. So you're not in this data anymore. This is just solely people that we know use AI. And again, so what following activities do you do? And as you'd imagine, searching for information is always going to be up there as a big thing. But again, similarly, like once you start to break this out, so this one's going to be a bit of crazy. But as I said, there's a lot of data behind this. So I'm going to talk about this from a kind of a point of view, really. So one of the things that we saw is these kind of two age ranges here. As you would imagine, like especially these bits, like how you're using it for work. Are you doing work research on it? Are you writing emails with it? Obviously, that's where the kind of the take-up's really, really high for those kind of like how you're using it like throughout your day. Most groups is all about, getting recommendations, getting those kind of comparisons and things like that. But the real divide across ages and regions is actually the depth of use, which is quite interesting, really. As I said, like around here, using it for kind of work, kind of behaviors and things like that. When we go back to the education side of it, is that the more educated you are, the more kind of integrated it is into your life as well. So I think there's some really interesting stuff that would be in the white paper that we kind of cut out. Really.
The yellow, I think, is actually a really useful one for
That's the holidays and travel.
No,
right?
comparing.
Compare and contrast,
Because that's probably the most useful one for most like clients, either in any sector, like the B2B clients particularly. If you're making a decision on software changes, that's a massive decision. And you need to know that you're comparing appropriately. And we're seeing for a lot of our B2B clients, just that the volume of people coming through from the LLMs is much higher and the quality is quite good because you're getting a much better comparison of the different tech that's available to you. It's much more thorough than you would get from a search engine. And actually, it's like they're not taking from search engines, they're taking from the tech review sites because they're scraping all of that. So it's kind of a much better aggregator. So I think there's other sectors. It's not just Google who's going to kind of suffer almost, but actually some of the other vertical kind of things. It's the same with the travel, the sky scanners, those kind of like vertical search engines are actually going to be the ones with that yellow are going to be the ones that kind of have a bigger knock-on effect from.
Absolutely. And I think there's some quite interesting stuff as we're looking in state that's not necessarily in here, kind of about that. Like, for example, one of the real commonalities across all age groups, all educational regions, was that no one just asked one question. Like very few kind of did a kind of one hit and wonder type thing. So there's a lot of back and forth. There's that kind of discussion, kind of answer.
Because you don't get frustrated when you go into a normal search or to those vertical
you're on the third
search
page.
bits. It's like you have to go by their UX. So it doesn't come to you. You have to go by what they've set up. And if it hasn't quite got the things that you're looking for, you just move to another option or you get frustrated, you move on with your day. But because you can keep inquiring and pushing to a specific need for you.
Dive deeper and deeper into it as you go. And I think that was actually, some of the interesting stuff about it is how they were using it for those kind of bigger, deeper questions. I think one of the big things, which we'll probably touch on in a sec actually, is how many people are actually relying on AI before they even get to the search. Because I think one of the things that we've talked about before is that if you're not in that AI part, you've kind of missed out on all of the kind of consideration part. So by the time you do end up going to Google because you want to go to that specific website or find out more, like once you kind of go to the site, huge amounts of work has already been done. So if you're not optimizing to be in that space, that's going to have another knock-on effect to your traffic, which won't be 0 clicks. It's just you're not part of the conversation.
Which is kind of what we were talking about earlier about the kind of consideration itinerary planning for the culture space. That's where you'd be doing that. You might then go, right, I need to book tickets for these things that you've considered. But that would, if you haven't gone there for the yellow and the blue part, which is a big chunk of it, then you're not even in the consideration.
Yeah. And one of the things that I thought would be quite interesting if we actually break it down by regions. So this isn't all regions, but I wanted to kind of, break it down, like pick 4 regions that I thought were quite interesting. So London's quite interesting purely because it's more well-rounded. It's got high adoption and things like that. The Southeast is quite interesting. If you go back to the one where we're talking about whether you use AI or not, Southeast wasn't particularly great for use. But of those using it, actually, you can really see that they're obviously commuters into London or they're remote workers. So actually how they're using it. So
it's basically the
so
same as
professional
London.
services and all this kind of jazz down here actually has a high index relative within that region. So you can see actually there's a lot of professional usage down here. Some of the ones that really stood out, so it's not really on this chart. East Midlands, East of England, love using it to book their travel. They just love it. Yeah. So if you're like talking about the domestic tourism and getting the itinerary and things, there were like 3 or 4 regions that said, actually, we don't use AI that much, but when we do use it, we use it heavily to get itineraries and for travel and domestic tourism and all the things like that. So there's definitely some interesting things that kind of jump out. So we can see that, like for example, the Southwest.
Well-being's massive, isn't it, for the Southwest? Very healthy.
Old people, loads of money to travel, and they need tablets all the time, don't they? That's how it works.
They need to learn to walk.
Yeah, it's data. But yeah, actually, to be fair, when I pulled this, this is quite
that's
high
just injuries,
age.
like just people who have got like back injuries. What can they do?
There's a lot of hills and stuff as well. Yeah. So there was some quite interesting stuff as you kind of break this out. If we move on to versus search. So again, this is quite interesting. So we've got here that people that just rely on it more than they would do traditional search. And I think it's quite important to point out here that you might rely on it more than you do traditional search, but it doesn't mean you don't use traditional search. You're just more reliant on it. Then people that acknowledge they actually use it alongside as well.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, because one of the things that we've been talking about quite a lot, obviously, is even what do we mean by traditional search? We had the kind of research last time about TikTok search and people using social search as what they class as traditional search. So that could be an evolution of looking into this, of like what they even mean as traditional search.
Well, actually, from that
action-based search,
from that 18 to 21 stuff, one of the things that stayed really consistent over the last 3 years is no one really uses like the traditional ways to get their news or the consumption is TikTok's massive, YouTube's massive, as you'd imagine, and Instagram as well. So again, that'll kind of come into this as well. So if we look at it by age and education, again, the more educated you are, the more likely you are to rely on it. There was some interesting, this is not in here, but the kind of the cross-verification stuff that says the people that rely on it the most seem to be the most educated, but actually they ask more questions of it and they're less trusting of it as well, which is quite interesting. So they use it a lot, but they're still quite cynical or realistic about the whole thing, actually. But again, this is where it starts to kind of get more interesting. Again, it's this kind of this power group of 25 to 34-year-olds.
I would class that as 25 to 44.
This whole group? Yeah, they're pretty similar, right?
Actually, the 25 to 44 is like, when we're looking earlier at those kind of, again, those audiences, that's your engine, isn't it? So if you're thinking about where you need to get to those audiences, that is a pivot of what we need to be thinking about. Have you seen the Claude ads against Chatty?
Yeah, the ones in the Super Bowl and stuff like that.
So it's that obviously Chatty are going to be launching ads, so that'll be something that we've been talking to a lot of our clients about.
The best thing about that though was how the actors actually really sounded like ChatGPT as well.
Yeah, they were great.
It was really good. Even
what
the pauses.
Great idea! That's such a genius idea. You're so clever.
That's why I like AI. But this one's quite interesting. So this is where we start to see gaps emerging, I think, where I actually choose it over traditional search. Now, again, I would make a massive kind of leap into this to say, actually, you're not necessarily ditching traditional search. But again, this is where people are doing all of their research, whether it's researching your holiday, researching your night out, researching that B2B SaaS tool that you want to buy, all of these things. There's a lot of actual kind of people that are just going straight into the AI first and going through all of that before then going into traditional search. And I think this is quite chunky, right? That's like pretty much 20-odd%. That's like a fifth, because I'm good at maths, of people that if you're not optimizing for that type of stuff, you're missing out on 20%, potentially 20% of your audience. You're not part of that conversation. You're not part of the discussion. So when they actually do go into their kind of more specific mode where you might be using Google as your navigation tool a bit more, you've missed out.
I think it's also, again, going back to what we were saying about mindset. thinking about who are those people more. So if you're looking for the decision maker in things, who's the person who's asking multiple questions, getting more informed, being more of an influencer in a decision, whether that is for like a business kind of tech decision or planning an itinerary, like who's the one who's actually spending the time, because they're going to be much more influential if they've gone deeper into something. So,
and it's having the range of content, because one thing that we always talk about from a B2B point of view is that, which kind of touched on there, is that you kind of got the influencer, you've got the user, you've got the buyer. So there's at least 3 different groups of audience that actually, if the user is like, how is this going to make my life easier, and how do you actually use this thing? Can I get a demo?
Yeah.
Versus the influencer, which might be more around, I want case studies, I want to know how strategically this fits into it, blah, blah, blah. Then you've obviously got the buyers, so actually more kind of cost sensitive, like what are the different options, what are the tiers, what do you get within those tiers? And I think actually making sure all of that content not only exists, but actually is raising into the kind of AI summaries is going to be massively important.
Yeah.
And also that's similar for culture, right? Because it's the same decision-making process, right? You've got the cultural gatekeepers that we term in the household, even if you're talking about families or couples and things like that. So again, it's making sure that you've got that well-rounded content. We're doing quite a lot of AI audits at the moment because it's obviously hot on trend. But actually, it's not just about what you do on your site. So you kind of got the SEO side of it. You've got your kind of LLM.text and like all of the structured schema and all that type of jazz. But actually, are you being raised up in the top 5 things to do or the top 5 tech SaaS and all of these type of things? It's that kind of like link building bit.
Digital PR.
Yeah, exactly. It's the digital PR stuff. So when we're kind of doing this, the similarities, the overlaps are quite big. You've still kind of got the on-site tech. So make sure the LLMs can crawl it, get the content and things like that. But then you've got where you're putting the content, not necessarily the site, but because you've obviously got people trying to gain Reddit, and you've got obviously LinkedIn's a massive kind of cited channel for all of the LLMs for now until they change that. But again, this is where it gets really interesting, because you've got the likes of ChatGPT and Perplexity that are kind of like learning all this stuff. But Google's been doing this for like 30 years, right? So still kind of concentrating on that EAT, that eats kind of the authoritative and trustworthy and all of that type of stuff is just going to be really, really important, because that'll all kind of probably merge into what Google's doing to a degree. So it kind of matches the SEO side of things. And then the link building digital PR is the same kind of dude, not only getting the endorsement back to your site from a search point of view, but actually being seen on those, so you're more likely to get cited in the LLMs as well. So that's why you should give us loads of money to do your SEO audits. And AI audits, we're all over that. So there's loads of huge amounts of data that came out of this that was really, really good. Just as an overall thoughts, there they are. I think there's so much data in this that we can actually split it actually by client, by sector. So again, if there's anything that particularly jumps out and you want to know about, we can see if we ask that question or how we can kind of infer any kind of response for that. But again, we're going to write this up. It's going to be available tomorrow on the WhatsApp channel. Boom. So scan that, get the WhatsApp channel, and all your dreams come true. Anyway, so that was the last slide. So I think that's actually quite a lot covered, and we did it with 10 minutes spare. So that's actually pretty impressive.
There's a way for people to ask questions. There's only 2 people voting on the survey because I think it's broken. So
wicked.
We will send it around.
Cool. And if we can't send it around, we'll just put it in ChatGPT and make stuff up. Cool. That's it. So we can switch off.
Thank you.
We'll send the survey and polls around another time.